Hello children, we are discussing the chapter 12 of your book, that is friction. In this chapter, what we have discussed already is what is friction, the opposing force that stops motion is known as, that tends to stop motion is known as friction. Next, the cause of friction, the irregularities in the form of hills and valleys between the surfaces is the cause of friction. क्या कारण है फ्रिक्शन का बच्चे? Irregularities or roughness of a surface is the reason behind the friction. Next, we have discussed बच्चे the factors affecting friction. There are two factors which affect the friction of a surface. The one is roughness. More the roughness of a surface, that object will get more friction, will exert more friction, and less the roughness means less the irregularities means less friction. Second factor is weight of the object. More weight will pose more friction and less weight will cause less friction. Next, we discuss fluid friction in this chapter. The friction or the opposing force exerted by the fluids is known as fluid friction. The frictional force exerted by the fluids on any object floats in or on or over them is known as drag. The frictional force exerted by the fluids is known as drag. Then we have discussed the specialized body shape, which is meant to reduce the friction, which is meant to reduce the air and water pressure, and that body shape is streamlined body shape. The body shape in which the ends are tapered and it is thick from the middle, that is known as streamlined body shape. The ships, the boats, the fishes and the birds are maintained that shape, are provided with that shape because to reduce the pressure, reduce the friction of water and air respectively. Next we have discussed friction is a necessary evil. There are certain things without friction which can't be able to happen. But along with that, friction also causes certain wear and tear as it generates heat, and that will cause the damage of the surfaces of various objects. So that is why it is said that friction is a necessary evil. So first we have discussed the advantages of friction in my previous video. What were the advantages, what were the necessities of friction, or where are the necessities of friction is there? First is, it helps us to walk. The friction between the feet and ground helps us to walk, helps us to move over the ground. If there is no friction over the surface, then it will be very tough to move over that. As I explained to you, it is not easy to move over a wet marble floor or an oily marble floor because of the less friction. The oily marble floor or oily surface has less friction, as oil fills the irregularities. Next is movement of vehicles. The friction between the tires of the vehicles and the surface and the road surface will help the movement of vehicles. The tires of the vehicles like bikes, the cars, trucks, buses are provided with the grooves, and grooves increases the friction, and that friction will provide them a better grip over the road and prevents skidding of the vehicles. The vehicles do not skid over the road when we apply the brakes. Next, spiked shoes on the athletes fit for better grip. You must have seen that athletes wore certain spiked shoes, as spike provided with the shoes will provide them a better grip, as spikes increases the friction between the feet and the ground, due to that more friction, the better grip is provided to that athlete. Next, writing work. Either writing on the board, the friction between this pen or marker pen and the surface will lead to the writing purpose. We cannot be able to write over a glass with the help of chalk. Why? Because the surface of glass is very smooth, it has very less irregularities, due to which it is not easy for us to write with the help of a chalk on a glass surface. Next, application of brakes. The frictional force between the brakes and the drum of the vehicle or drum of the rim of the vehicle will allows the vehicle to stop. As we exert the brakes, the brakes exert a frictional force which opposes the motion. So gradually the vehicle slows down and ultimately stops. Next is lighting a matchstick. You must have seen the sides of a matchbox and the matchstick. If we, rub the matchstick over the sides of the matchbox, due to the frictional force between the two, we deliberately made them rough so that the frictional force between them is quite high. So due to that more frictional force, a large amount of heat is generated, and due to that large heat, that matchsticks lighten up. Next, screws and nails. The various nails and screws will remain embedded, will remain upholded in the wooden cabinets or in the walls because of the frictional force between the nails or the screws and the wooden cabinets. Next is the ways to increase friction. How you can increase the friction between the two surfaces. By two methods we can increase them. The first one is by making the surfaces more rough. As I explained you the example of matchstick, the sides of a matchbox are deliberately made rough to increase the friction between the matchstick and the sides. Next is by making grooves. The grooves of the tires of various vehicles are provided to increase the friction and for the better grip of the vehicle over the road surface. So these are the ways by which we can increase friction. Now we will discuss why we call the friction as an evil. What are the disadvantages of friction? Where friction causes damage to us. The first one is damage to machines. When we rub our hands with each other, then after rubbing they produce certain amount of heat because of the friction, because of the sliding friction. Likewise, when the parts of the machines moves over each other, then they rubbed together, and by the rubbing of the machine parts, a large amount of heat is generated. That heat will damage the machine parts, the other machine parts which are in the surroundings of those parts. So by that large or extent of heat is increased, the frictional force will cause a damage to that particular machine. The second is wear and tear. As we know, the friction will produce heat, and due to that heat, due to that rubbing, the wear and tear of the parts of machines in the contact takes place. The example is the soles of your shoes and the tires of your automobiles rubbed after 1 year, 2 years, 5 months, 6 months, in a limited period of time. The more you use them, more they rub with the surface of the ground, more easily and more quickly they become flat. And the grip of those tires, those rubbed tires, wear and tear tires, and the soles of your shoes will be reduced, and ultimately they broken off. They wear and tear from places to places, and then we have to replace them. So that wear and tear of those parts of the machines is also because of the friction. One shoe pair which you purchase does not goes along with you your whole lifetime. Why? Because its life reduces because of the friction. Because those soles of your shoes, the tires of your automobiles will undergo certain wear and tear due to the friction between the surface of the tire and the surface of the earth. Next is loss of energy. Friction always opposes the motion. So if I want to move on the ground and there is a friction between the ground and me, that will always oppose my motion. So I have to exert a fixed amount of force to move. मुझे एक फिक्स अमाउंट ऑफ फोर्स लगाना ही पड़ेगा बच्चे, ताकि मैं उस फ्रिक्शन को ओवरकम कर सकूं. उस फ्रिक्शन के पार जा सकूं, और फ्रिक्शन के पार जाऊंगा तभी मोशन शुरू होगा. So a fixed amount of energy is lost to move, to start the motion of an object. So friction always results in the expense of an energy, in the loss of certain amount of energy. Next is, and the last is, friction reduces the efficiency of machines, the ability or the capability of machines. क्षमता जो होती है machines की वो कम हो जाएगी due to friction. As we discussed, बच्चे, some of the forces applied to run a machine is wasted overcoming the friction. जो फोर्स हम टोटल लगा रहे हैं बच्चे एक मशीन पर, उसका कुछ हिस्सा, कुछ पार्ट क्या हो जाएगा, वेस्ट हो जाएगा इन ओवरकमिंग द फ्रिक्शन. अब बच्चे कुछ फोर्स वेस्ट हो गया तो कुछ बचा, जो बचा है बच्चे उससे जो मशीन की एफिशिएंसी है, उसकी जो क्षमता है वो कम हो जाएगी. फॉर एग्जांपल, अगर मैंने बच्चों 100% फ्यूल डाला है तो 100% में से 10% तो फ्रिक्शन को कम करने में चला जाएगा, तो बचा कितना, 90% फ्यूल इज यूज्ड टू मूव. The 10% is lost away in the form of heat or in the overcoming the friction. So that's how the loss of energy takes place, and henceforth the efficiency of the machines reduces. So there are 4 points in the disadvantages of friction. The first one is friction causes damage to the machines, as friction leads to the wastage of energy. The parts, the moving parts rubbed with each other, so that will leads to the damage of the machines, machine parts. Second is wear and tear. Friction will results in the wear and tear of certain parts which are in direct contact with each other. Next one is loss of energy, and then the efficiency of the machine is reduced, as certain force is required to overcome the friction. So fixed amount of energy is lost, and due to that lost energy, the efficiency of the machines is reduced, is decreased. So these are the disadvantages of friction. The next topic of discussion is the ways to reduce the friction. As we discussed, the friction cause damage as well. So in certain cases we have to reduce that friction. And what are the ways to reduce it? That we'll discuss one by one. The first one is by lubricating. So a lubricant is used on a surface from where we reduce the friction. What is the lubricant? Any substance that brings the smoothness or that removes the roughness of a surface is known as lubricant. Any substance which reduces the friction by filling the irregularities is known as lubricant. What does this lubricant do? Lubricant makes a layer over these impurities. First it fills these gaps and then make a smooth layer over the surface, and this smooth layer henceforth reduces the friction. As we know, less the roughness, more the smoothness, that means friction is reduced, friction is less. So by addition of lubricant to a particular surface, to machines, we can reduce the friction between the parts of the machines. As a lubricant, we use talcum powder over our carom boards. You must have observed, bache, if we don't have that spotting powder, we use a normal talcum powder to bring the smoothness to the surface. How? That talcum powder is a very fine powder which fills the gaps, due to which the striker moves very easily here and there. Next, grease is used in the moving chain of a bicycle or moving chain of the automobiles, so that that lubricant will reduce the friction between the moving part, henceforth they do not break easily. Likewise, certain other lubricants like graphite and lubricating oil like mobile oil are used to lubricate the things and to reduce the friction between the two surfaces of machines. Next, by polishing. By polishing a rough surface, by a very good quality of polishing on a surface will make that surface quite smooth, and smoothness means the friction is reduced. Likewise, the polish fills the irregularities. Polish in irregularities को fill कर देगी और surface क्या हो जाएगा बच्चे, smooth, and smoothness means less friction. The third one, and a very important one, is the use of ball bearings. What are ball bearings, बच्चे? Ball bearing is a hollow circular device composed of multiple metal balls joined together. This ball bearing rotates around an axle. Bachche, here axle is represented as a dot, but actually axle is a stick-like structure like this. It's a rod-like structure over which the bearing is set up, and this bearing rotates very easily as sliding friction is reduced to rolling friction. क्या होगा बच्चे? बॉल बेरिंग क्या करेगा? स्लाइडिंग फ्रिक्शन को रोलिंग फ्रिक्शन में कन्वर्ट कर देगा. एंड एज वी आर अवेयर बच्चे दैट रोलिंग फ्रिक्शन इज ऑलवेज लेस देन द स्लाइडिंग फ्रिक्शन. सो बाय कन्वर्टिंग द स्लाइडिंग फ्रिक्शन इनटू द रोलिंग फ्रिक्शन we reduce the overall friction by using the ball bearings. So what is a ball bearing? It is a hollow circular device containing small metal balls which are fitted around the moving parts of a device. That is known as a ball bearing. And ball bearing converts the sliding friction into rolling friction. So these are the three ways which we discussed, bachche, the by lubricants, by polishing, and by the use of ball bearings. The fourth method to reduce the friction is by using rollers and wheels. Certain heavy items like the desert cooler stands, the Almirah stands, the big suitcases are provided with certain rollers below it. These rollers converts the sliding friction into the rolling friction, and henceforth rolling friction is less than the sliding friction. The friction is reduced. बच्चे हमने क्या किया? हैवी सूटकेसेस के नीचे रोलर्स लगा दिए हैं, तो स्लाइडिंग फ्रिक्शन हमें वो पहले घसीटना पड़ता, पहले वो स्लाइड करना पड़ता. नाउ वी कैन इजीली रोल इट बाय द हेल्प ऑफ रोलर्स. सो दैट स्लाइडिंग फ्रिक्शन इज रिड्यूस्ड टू रोलिंग फ्रिक्शन, एंड henceforth we can easily push or pull it. So by use of the rollers we can reduce the friction. So now bachche, this is a suitcase which has rollers fitted below it. So when I am pushing it, it's very easy for me to push it because of these rollers bachche. These rollers convert the sliding friction into rolling friction. So it would be very easy to push or pull it by the help of rollers. To reduce friction is by changing this body shape to streamlined body shape. As we know bachche, streamlined body shape has less friction. So if we make the bodies of certain materials streamlined, then the friction of water and air over those bodies can be reduced efficiently. That's the particular reason why the shape of boats and ships are to be made streamlined, so that the friction of water over their body can be reduced. That is the advantage of providing streamlined body shape to the boats and ships. Here we also study one more thing bachche, that we study about the shooting stars bachche. As I explained you in my previous video, that whensoever a meteor will enters into the atmosphere, due to friction of air, that meteor generates a large amount of heat. When that meteor comes and strikes with the air, a large amount of heat is generated, and due to that large amount of heat, it catches fire. That is known as a shooting star. So likewise, when spaceship goes into the space and returns back into the atmosphere, that will also catch fire, but it's not happening. जैसे बच्चे meteor फायर कैच कर लेता है एटमॉस्फेयर में आती, तो स्पेसशिप को भी फायर कैच कर लेनी चाहिए, लेकिन ऐसा नहीं होता. Why? Because at the nose of the spaceship there is a heat shield is present, which shields that spaceship from extra heat which is generated during friction or due to friction of air. So that heat is absorbed by that heat shield, and spaceship does not catches fire. So if someone asks you why spaceship which enters out from outer space into the atmosphere does not catch as fire, so what will be the answer? The heat shield present at the nose of the spaceship absorb that heat, and thus whensoever a spaceship enters the atmosphere, it does not catches fire. Next, one more thing bachche, one more extra point here is that the wheels of trains and the railway tracks are both metallic in nature. They are nowadays made up of steels. Why we are doing so? Because bache, steel reduces the rolling friction as well. Both the metallic surfaces, both the surfaces are made up of steel, and the steel reduces the rolling friction. Due to that less friction, the movement of that heavy train over that small path become very easy. That is why the wheels of trains are to be made of steel.